Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and I'm here with Lucy Gray, and this is the closing keynote session of the 2015 Global Education Conference, our 6th year, and we'd like to welcome our closing keynote, Lord Jim Knight. Welcome, Jim.
Welcome. Well, thank you, Steve. It's a real honor to be able to join you for this great conference.
We're really delighted to have you here. After 175 sessions, I think our brains are full. We've just had a delightful time, but we cannot wait to hear from you. We've all been waiting, and we really appreciate your being here. Thanks to our sponsors. Go ahead.
No, you carry on.
Thanks to our sponsors and supporters this year. Special thanks to VIF International Education and TES. They've just made this whole event possible. Our founding co-sponsors of the conference are the Global Campaign for Education United States chapter and Iron USA. A deep appreciation to them and the rest of these fine organizations for making this free event possible. For those of you who are participating live, this is now your opportunity to indicate from where you are participating. Look to the left of the map. You're looking for the star icon. You're going to click on it twice and then click on the map. Do give a shout out in the chat. Let us know your location, the time, the temperature, anything else you think would be fun for us to be aware of. I know Coach Carroll is here, so I'm sure we're going to hit Australia. Nice to see continental representation. Algeria, Greece, Saudi Arabia, Canada, United States, North America. Wherever you're participating from, we sure are glad you're here. As a former cabinet minister in the Labor government, Minister for Schools and Learners, and member of the Privy Council in the House of Lords, Jim Knight is now using his skills and expertise as the Chief Education Advisor for TES. As a national politician, he has skills in decision-making, communication, media handling, and strategic policy. And he has unrivaled expertise in the interrelationship between education, skills, and employment policy given his ministerial experience. He also has a current understanding of the potential use of digital technology in the delivery of public services. Lord Jim Knight, welcome.
Thank you so much, Steve. And as I said, it's a real honor to be able to come and join you and talk to you. It's a long time, if ever, that I've done a keynote at 9 p.m. After my dinner. I've done a few after dinner speeches, but not exactly in this format or over a cup of tea, which I'll have a little slip because I've also got a bit of a cough. So I'll try and remember to close off the talk if I need to have a cough. Where I want to start is, I don't know how many of you are parents. I'm sure in the chat you can give me a thumbs up or something if you're parents. But for me, the most precious moment is at the end of the day when you do the bedtime story and you sat down with your child or children and they're just getting engrossed in your story, and the lights are on in their eyes, and you just see that magic that, as a parent, is what you then want to see when you see your child being taught in school. And in many ways, ever since Tony Blair asked me to be schools minister back 9 years ago, I think it is now, when I visited all the schools that I've visited since, and I still visit a lot of schools, it's that light in the children's eyes that I'm looking for, and it's one of the measures of great teaching when I see it. Now, I was A few years ago, I was getting ready to make a speech about teaching in the House of Lords, and I was researching my subject, as you do. As Lords, we don't get any paid staffers or researchers, so we do all our own work, of course. And so I thought, well, I'll ring up Bill. And Bill at the time was the Chief Operating Officer for TES, one of the sponsors of this conference. And I said to Bill, I was in my, wood-panelled office in the House of Lords with the red leather and, all of the tradition and pomp of the Palace of Westminster. And I rang Bill in his snazzy glass-walled offices just a few miles up the road in central London. And I said, who's your most downloaded teacher on TES? And he said, well, we have been looking at that, and we've decided that we're going to give an award at the TES Awards for the Resource Contributor of the Year. And so they came back to me with the information, and they told me that the biggest, the most downloaded contributor to the TES resource sharing site was a woman called Bev Evans. And so Bill told me he decided to phone her up at school. So he rings up the number for the school, and the phone is answered by the school office. And Bill says, "We've got a teacher called Bev Evans. I wonder if it's possible to speak to her." And the woman in the office said, "No, sorry, we don't have a teacher called Bev Evans here." I said, "Oh, sorry." She said, "No, but we do have a learning support assistant called Bev Evans. Do you want to speak to her?" Bill said, "Well, yeah. Oh, okay, sure. If it's convenient, please put her on." So Bev came to the phone, and her story was that she was living in a town called St David's, which is right in the southwest corner of Wales. And she's a mother of three. She had a child with cerebral palsy and therefore severe learning difficulties, but was working as a community artist and also was working at the school as a lunchtime supervisor, or dinner lady, as we probably prefer to call them, those of us who are slightly old-fashioned. And the head teacher of the school wanted the school to be fully inclusive, and knew that he was going to be admitting a child with similar sorts of learning difficulties to Bev's youngest, and persuaded Bev to come and work for him as a learning support assistant. And so once Bev started, she ended up in this routine where she would come home from work every day and obviously sort the whole family out. And then she would spend a chunk of her evening preparing the resources that were needed for the child that she was looking after in school to be fully included across the whole curriculum in the lessons the next day. And these turned out to be fantastic resources. Things like learning maths through the hungry caterpillar, or a PowerPoint with just big facial expressions and the words that describe those facial expressions alongside. A whole massive range of different things. And soon her colleagues in the school found out about these resources and wanted to use them too. So she'd share them through whatever means digitally within the school. And then a few teachers locally in St David's and elsewhere in Pembrokeshire heard about them, and so they asked if she could email them, and she started doing that. But in the end, more and more people were asking to use the resources, and it became a bit of a fag to, which is a colloquial English word that means something else, but a bit of a drag, it was a bit of a downer, to have to do all of that sharing manually. So she got a website together, and that website is still running, and a lot of those resources are still on it. That was okay. But then in the end, yeah, she tried a few things, and then she came to TES and uploaded resources to TES, where there are a whole bunch of other teachers doing exactly the same thing and sharing. And at that point, effectively, she entered the sharing economy. Now, I want to pause at that point to just quickly talk about hotels. And you might think that's a slightly random thing to do, but you know, if we look at this slide, you will see the Intercontinental Hotels group as the biggest hotel group in the world, followed by Hilton, followed by the French group Accor. Been going between 44 and 65 years. They have each around 600,000 rooms in around 4,000 hotels in around 100 countries. Big hotel groups, and the notion that anyone would enter the market and do hotels at that scale with any of the speed necessary to build a bunch of hotels, to buy the land, to get the planning consent, to train the staff, to make it all happen, is just ludicrous. Until just a few years ago, this happened. And suddenly, we have a new provider of visitor rooms in double the number of countries, in many, many more cities than any of those chains, looking after many, many more guests, and suddenly the sharing economy has caused a big problem for those hotel chains. There's still a room for hotel chains. I still use hotels, but I also use Airbnb. And we know then the sharing economy across a whole different bunch of things. I checked my Facebook just before we got started. I haven't used OkCupid. I have looked at kittens on YouTube. I haven't used Zipcar, but I think the notion that we have, most of us who own cars, we sit for 90% of the time unused on the drive, and that's a ridiculously inefficient use of resource. And certainly if we live in cities, it's much more sensible just to rent one for an hour. I've used eBay. Ironically, I've bought and sold cars on eBay so that they can sit on my drive. I've just started using Duolingo, absolutely extraordinary app for learning languages on a mobile, kind of on the hoof. So you just do 5 or 10 minutes every day as you're going to work or whatever. And in that case, a really interesting business model that I'll come back to. And then, particularly in the States, I think a lot of you use Waze. It's not so big here, as a way of as a crowd telling each other where the traffic problems are. So we're all familiar with all of that, and in essence the way that works is you find something where you're sort of creating abundance, where you're creating a lot of something anyway. So it's kind of free because it was going to be created anyway, and then you make a platform to then connect people to that free resource and make that readily available. So in the case of Airbnb, that's kind of obvious. We've got spare rooms, many of us, or we go on holiday, and if we are sufficiently trusting of the platform and all of the reassurances we get, then we can earn a little bit of extra money by connecting with other people. And often when we go and stay in an Airbnb place, we quite enjoy the human interaction of that. And in Duolingo's case, the extraordinary, this is a learning app, I guess. But what they realized is that at the higher end of language learning, I think you can learn 16 different languages back into English on Duolingo, and it's a free service. But the reason why it's free is because they realized that at the higher level of language learning, there's a lot of translation going on. Why keep asking learners to translate the same things again and again when there's whole businesses wanting to get stuff translated? So they're earning money by providing a translation service for other people that you as learners are doing as part of your learning, which is just amazingly clever as an idea. And there are, I think, I think I'm right in saying there's something like 10 million people learning the language on Duolingo now. So it's, I think it's fair to say, a bit of a success. Now, TES, and there are, I'll talk about TES quite a lot during this presentation. I work there, I'm their Chief Education Advisor. But there are other sharing platforms out there that teachers use. TES was involved in setting up Share My Lesson, that's another one of them, but there are others. And a lot of this thinking that I'm going to talk about applies to those too. So forgive me that I'm going to talk about TES, but you'll understand too, it's the one I know best, so it's the one I'm going to talk about. But it's exactly the same theory with the sharing platform that we have at TES, that you have people, teachers, are creating resources. They can be worksheets, they can be lesson plans, they can be using videos. There's all sorts of things that teachers are using around the world. Why reinvent the wheel? If teachers done it somewhere else, why not be inspired by what they've done around the thing that you want to teach? Why not use it and adapt it and improve it? Occasionally, you might even want to just use it as it is because it's perfect. But no reason to start again from scratch if those teachers are willing to share. So there's all of that work being done in abundance. TES creates the platform, which grew in the end, it grew out of a chat room. We noticed, or what TES did, TES noticed that there was a lot of resource sharing going on, kind of by email, and it was all really clunky and difficult for people, and it wasn't allowing everybody to have those resources. There were bilateral exchanges of resources, but that was noticed in the chat room. So it was decided, just to make it easier for teachers, we would just make a free platform available for people to be able to share stuff. And it's grown like crazy, connecting peer-to-peer resource sharing. So when Bev started sharing, I think the first resource that she shared, I'm just checking my notes back here, was a resource about the, was it here? No, I'll forget about it. I went away. But I think it was a resource about the human body. But she shared more and more. And by the time Bill rang her up, she had been downloaded in well over 100 countries. Been downloaded well over 1 million times around the world. And it was an extraordinary thing for that learning support system to have had that impact on teachers all across the globe. And that's why she won that award. There's a picture of Bev having won the TES award way back in, I think, 2012. Now, just to sort of help you think about what that means in impact, I'll take a different example, which is in higher education. There's a picture there of Andrew Ng, who is a professor at Stanford University. Now, if he'd chosen the traditional route of, say, 30 students each semester, and he'd worked for 30 years lecturing in his thing, which we'll talk about in a minute, he'd have done 60 semesters in total, which would have meant that he'd have impacted 1,800 students, which would be great. And he'd have got a lot better at teaching over that time because he'd have had that experience of teaching all of those students. However, Andrew is also a founder of Coursera, the MOOC platform that Stanford and others have set up. And in just one course, his machine learning course, which when I did a Google search, I think in 2014 was the most popular MOOC. I think that was the date of the article that I found. Over 1.1 million students had enrolled. So the impact of him using technology to share was massive between 1,800 over Korea to 1.1 million over one course. And in many ways, it's no different for teachers sharing stuff. So here's Ray Rogers. Ray was a teacher. He's now become a full-time resource author, but based in England. And as you can see here, by some weird coincidence, he has 174 resources on the TED site, and they've been viewed in 174 countries, over 1 million times. And you can also see the diversity of countries that Ray's resources have been used in. So you've got the top 15 in blue, so US, Australia, New Zealand, parts of the Middle East, and so on. But you can also see some of the poorest countries where his resources have been used in places like Madagascar, in Botswana, in Malawi, in India, and parts of West Africa. So this isn't just about teachers helping each other in the rich parts of the world. This is about teachers being able to impact in places where great teaching is in short supply, where they need all the help they can get, and to be able to download and access some of these great resources that Ray is sharing has a real development impact. And we've just had the Sustainable Development Goals agreed just a couple of months ago in New York, and goal number 4, I think, is around quality education, and the quality of teaching within the targets is right up there as something that we want to do. So Ray is having real impact. And then I want to tell you about this user as a teacher in Kenya. So Michaela John, I don't know anything about Michaela John. I'm pretty certain she doesn't, or he doesn't look like an eagle. But that's the avatar. And as you can see, Michaela John's uploaded 27 resources. They've been viewed 10,663 times. So a much more sort of average number. And this is one of the resources. It's a perfectly fine resource, I guess, around teaching French about the family, for those of you who are not French speakers. But if you look at the bottom of that page, you'll see the reviews that this resource has had, and you'll see one right at the bottom. That is from Adil Ches, who is in China. And Adil Ches has been on the network a little bit longer, has uploaded 32 resources. They've been viewed close to 40,000 times, so a little bit busier. This one is a really simple resource, just listing the Spanish-speaking countries, and often those simple ones are some of the most popular. And then you look at some of the reviews of this particular resource. You see a reviewer based in the States. Sadly, we haven't persuaded Dumana to be a giver yet. She's not yet a sharer, or he. I don't know anything about him or her. But at least is reviewing. So starting to put something into the network, and that's great. But also reviewing that is Ashtak, who has only been around on the network for a year, based in England, but has started to upload. And the previous resource, very simple list of Chinese countries that he really liked, or she really liked, gave 5 stars to. But this is a really sophisticated resource. It's a top trump game for learning French and healthy eating, all in one glorious single resource. But the thing I really like, I don't know whether you can see it, but right at the bottom there is a review from Lemoulier, I think it says. Again, gives it 5 stars. What I really like about this review is saying, fantastic, God, I can barely see it, but essentially saying, giving some improvement. I suggest changing le pain, sliced brown bread, for le pain complet. Whatever, that's some of the dark round loaves, I can't really read it. But the notion that you have people in China, Kenya, China, the US, England, they're sharing stuff with each other, and then able to start to improve each other's work, and iteratively see that sort of improvement. So it's not just the sharing, but it's then also the development for each other, which I find really exciting. So, Bev, she won the award. In March last year, I woke up to the very sad news that Bev had died. And she had been sharing her story with the battle against cancer on Facebook, so it wasn't a great surprise. She did it with her usual generosity, so we could share that experience with her usual good humour, with her sense of optimism that was only matched by her optimism about how the Welsh rugby team would do. And it was a very sad day for all of us at TES. She's become one of the staff as our main advisor on special education and needs education. And at that point, when she passed away 18 months ago, her resources had gone from where it was when she won the award to 4.5 million downloads, 4.5 million users have used her resources around the world. And pretty much every country in the world, about 200 countries around the world. It has grown to an extraordinary level. If she'd have lived, she might have gone on to do more than just resource sharing, because the global teacher isn't just someone who shares resources. The global teacher is now starting to do other things. So this is Mike Gershon. Yeah, he's got, what, 232 resources that he's been sharing. They've been viewed 2.3 million times. But Mike, who's a teacher just north of London, he's now also starting to do professional development. We call it CPD in the UK, PD in the States. So he's sharing his skills as a teacher with an online course that he then tutors. And one of the things I then like about that is if you look at some of the comments of the teachers as they introduce themselves on this course, yes, we've got one in Staffordshire and Sussex and Gloucestershire and London. These are all places in England. But then there's one at an international school in Thailand. And that this becomes a peer-to-peer exchange very much about professional development and improvement much more directly than simply just the resource sharing that we still think is important and the lifeblood of what we do. Or nothing to do with TES. This is a picture of Meena Patel, who's a friend of mine who runs something called video conferencing for global learning. And what you see here is she, in the bottom right of the screen is a picture of a teacher with a British Council logo behind him. He's sat, recruited by Meena, but he sat in an office in Redbridge, which is in northeast London. The big picture there is a picture of young people that he's teaching English to in Montevideo, in Uruguay. It's Montevideo conferencing, if you like. And not only is it working in terms of those children learning English successfully, we get, there's fantastic feedback about how it's working in Uruguay. The teacher in Uruguay, who's in the class there somewhere, is also getting some great professional development and learning different style of pedagogy from this teacher. I mean, it's particular to video, the detail of the pedagogy, but there's also an English style of teaching, which is just different to the slightly more didactic tradition in Uruguay. And this has been so successful that this form of global teaching is now extending into Sao Paulo. I think Meena is over in Brazil at the moment. Or Bev could have perhaps become, the ugly word, a teacherpreneur. So here's a picture of the young Craig Barton, who is a teacher up in a place called Bolton in the northwest of England. And he has devised a brilliant tool called Diagnostic Questions, based on the notion that it's an assessment tool, but it's one which says when you're designing multiple choice tests, the wrong answers are as important or more important in the design than the right answers, because they tell you a lot about where children are struggling in terms of what they're choosing. And then if you ask children, ask learners to record the reason why they answered in a particular way, you also end up capturing some really good explanations of the right answer, as well as capturing where children are going wrong. And so he's created this platform that allows that to happen. You even have league tables of the best explainers of stuff. Craig is a bit irritated that he's not top as a maths teacher, that's a 9-year-old who provides much better and clearer explanations that children relate to than the ones that he does. But again, really smart. That business is growing really quickly, and he's still teaching 2 days a week. And that's now something that's proliferating around the country and around the world. I think he's just got back from Cambodia, where it's being taken up at a huge level. So there's lots of different ways now that the global teacher is starting to express it, which is really exciting. Now finally, let me just go back to Bev, because I checked yesterday on Bev's stats, and in the 18 months since her passing, her legacy and popularity has continued to grow. To date, her resources have been downloaded 6.8 million times by 750,000 TES members in 257 countries. You can see there 547 resources. They've been viewed 11.5 million times, which shows a number of things. That in the end, they went and did a master's and expressed her brilliance in qualification terms. But as a learning support assistant before that, she was as valuable as her peers valued her. And great teachers don't need qualifications. They need the validation of other great teachers thinking that they're using her stuff. I think we also learn that the power of sharing and the power of technology in sharing. And of course, most importantly, we learn that the legacy of a great teacher will live on and on way beyond their passing. And that's the global teacher. And now I'm really looking forward to seeing if you've got any questions.
So if you have a question, you can put it in the chat, or you can raise your virtual hand. The virtual hand icon is in the participant window. It's the third one over.
I'm looking at the supervised chat. Should I be looking at something else as well?
No, you're perfect. Lucy's asked the first question. For people in the U.S. who are new to TES, can you give us an overview of what the company does?
Okay. So the company's been going for about 100 years, providing thought leadership and commentary on education through journalism, and we published something called the Times Education Supplement. For all of that time, and the Times Higher Education Supplement, we have the leading university world rankings that we will next year be launching in Berkeley at the university there. But we're busy in the world of recruitment in England and some in Australia, and we're now teacher trainers as well in the UK. But the big thing that we do is this resource sharing that I've been talking about today, and that we are now doing in the States through TES.com. We also, I don't know whether you saw the eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed back here, just here, I don't know if you can see what I'm pointing at. It says view on BlendSpace. So we also are on BlendSpace and Wikispaces, and we're now in the process of integrating BlendSpace in, and that's just been done, and that's a really beautiful tool for pulling in various resources and assembling lessons, and then being able to invite, add quizzes to those, and and being able to pull content not just from TES but from a bunch of other sources as well, and just drag and drop. It's really clean, really simple, and then you can invite members of the class in as well for them to be able to use it. It's a beautiful tool. Many of you will know BlendSpace, but we're now probably integrating that into into what TES does. But broadly, that's it. Broadly, it's everything. The business model is really straightforward. Love teachers, hope that they love you back. In the UK, the full offer is help them get a job, help them give them what they need to teach in the classroom, and help them with their development. We hope that we can move to offer more of that complete picture in the US, but for now we're really proud and pleased with what we're able to offer as the largest network of teachers in the world, with 7.4 million teachers, with over 1 million down there today of stuff that teachers want. What else we got?
Jim, I'm curious. Go ahead. I don't see any hands up.
Yeah, okay.
So you've watched education closely. How much of an impact do you think this connecting of teachers with each other will have in terms of education policy? As teachers increasingly are dialoguing in this way around content and materials and having these kinds of conferences, how will that impact the policy decision making?
Well, I think there are one or two sort of quick wins that we might get to in policy terms. You may not regard it as policy, but one of the things that policymakers have to worry about right now is money. And I think we're still some way away from being able to say that and predict the demise of the textbook. But certainly the enhancement to textbooks, and in some cases the need to buy them less frequently and spend less money on that. The solution to that is right here. Why spend loads of money on stuff that goes out of date so quickly when you've got this dynamic live content created by and for teachers? So that, in my mind, is a really quick win. And I think we can start to see that with other things, with assessments. We might get to a point where we're driving the quality of teaching and teacher development through more peer-to-peer connection and more peer-to-peer development that we can do to an extent online. I think it's always going to be a blend, if I'm honest. I think it's hard. The Harvard School of Education published a video toolkit at the weekend around video observation of teaching. So technology can do a certain amount of that, but it's going to be a blend of a certain amount of face-to-face observation and mentoring and coaching, but also with the power of peer-to-peer improvement. And in policy terms, I don't think there's anything more important than what we do around the improvement of teaching and the quality of teaching and how we support and nurture and celebrate great teachers. And that's right at the heart of what all of this can do. Where it then goes in the longer term, I'm a passionate believer in the need to reform education away from the straitjacket of accountability to sort of liberate teachers to focus more on giving learners the tools that they need to prosper in a rapidly changing world. I spent all day in a meeting that was trying to anticipate some of those changes in the labour market, thinking about what full employment could look like as technology is taking a lot of jobs away. And there are all sorts of exciting opportunities, but when we tested our thinking back with some young people, they have a huge desire to see the education system then change. And that then in turn, I think, means in policy terms, how we can connect teachers with employers, teachers with academics, teachers with other teachers, teachers with learners, learners with learners. And I think there's a connectedness that can provide a richer educational experience that then it informs the collaborative problem-solving style of learning that I think we're going to need rapidly to move towards if we're going to equip young people for this pretty crazy world they're going into.
I'll keep asking questions, but if you have a question for Jim, you can put it in the chat, or you can raise your virtual hand. It's the third icon over. Jim, is TES seeing any kinds of shifts because of people from different cultures collaborating with each other? Is there anything that is noticeable about having people around the world looking at teaching material?
So I've only just started to look at this at a relatively superficial level. But I think one of the things that is surprising to me, because we know context is crucial, and that every context is different for teaching, and that's a big part of great teaching is understanding the context for the individuals that they're teaching. But actually, there's still a lot of sort of universal truth about, or I don't know if universal truth is the right word, but there's a lot of things that remain constant that teachers want. And as I observe them training together through the CPD, or as I observe them sharing stuff with each other, or as I see that they're consuming things that I thought were very specific for a jurisdiction, and they still want to consume them in a completely different jurisdiction, I think there's aspects of pedagogy, there's aspects of the practice, as well as a bunch of content, which is true everywhere in the world. And that's part of the power of this global connectedness.
So we encourage you to be bold and ask a question. You can raise your virtual hand. We'll give you the microphone.
Go on, I'm quite nice.
I don't think that's the issue. We may just be at conference fatigue.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just having a quick look at the chat. But there's some interesting stuff there.
Yeah, so Roseanne is sort of playing with the same thought I am. She says, I see the teacher as an important fulcrum. The teacher in promoting global education is the agent of change, facilitating and inspiring this enhancement and transformation. And I think I was sort of trying to express the same thing, this historic tension between schooling as a form of sort of state control versus the liberation of individuals. And it always feels as though teachers, when given voice, really voice the value of helping the individual, which is often contrary to the kind of policies that relate to mandated compliance.
Yes, and that's a really interesting and intelligent way of thinking about your earlier question in respect to policy. And I completely agree. I think here in England, and as the jurisdiction I know best, we have had a national curriculum now for 30 years. Where people like me, I was a minister for 3 years, and I oversaw some curriculum change for secondary. We end up making decisions about what the program of study should be, what young people should be learning in subjects. Even though we're not trained as teachers, I don't really understand, on reflection, why I got involved in any of that. In some ways, it's none of my business, but I suppose I was accountable for what kids are learning, so in the end I made those decisions. But the person who introduced the national curriculum here in the UK back in the 80s is a peer of mine, literally a colleague of mine in the House of Lords, in the House of Peers, Ken Baker. And Lord Baker now, like me, thinks that we should now end our national curriculum at 14 as opposed to 16. It's tempting to say maybe we should end it all together, but I think we should free up a lot more timetable time, and we should free up some more years for learners to be able to pursue their passions and for teachers to be able to help them do that.
So Barbara has said, we know the voice of teachers is very faint. We're seeking a demonstration of that as no one has raised their hand to take the microphone yet. So please be bold. Make your voice heard. take questions for another couple of minutes, and then we're going to let Lord Jim go. Barbara says she'll take the mic, and she's on a mobile device. So, Barbara, this should work, but I'm giving you microphone privilege. You should be able to click on the talk button.
Hi, Steve. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and
I can
clear.
hear you, Barbara.
Okay, so I'm being bold, Steve. I'm taking them out because I was texting, but I figured, okay, since the texting doesn't really count as being bold, so I'll speak up.
Thank
back
you.
on,
I'm really pleased.
Beg pardon?
I'm really pleased. Thank you. You ask your question, Barbara.
Okay, yeah. I'm back on. It was not so much a question, but more of a comment, as far as teachers' voices being seen. You have, well, I'm going to speak for myself. I have that my issue is not so much just that, where we want to see policies in place for just the students, but mine is also one where, my concern is also one where we want globalization, we want standardized courses for us, our students, our learners. How about the educators getting standardized certification across the nation? I mean, it's such an issue for me as an educator moving from Florida, me going to Maine, me going to Vermont, and me required, certification, a different certification being required from me as an educator who, on my understanding is we have Common Core across most of the states from one of the speakers who spoke earlier on, and yet you have that disjointed non-unification when it comes to what teachers are allowed to teach or bring to the table across the board throughout, the nation or maybe internationally. And I have looked at CES's mission statement, and I mean, I'm just going to ask now a question: if when teachers from the United States or teachers in the Caribbean or have to go out and teach probably in the UK or Australia, it becomes a headache because of the difference in policies. Whereas we're hoping to teach the same somewhat curriculum despite the languages. For me, that becomes a hassle.
Yeah. So I completely agree, and by coincidence yesterday I was talking to the Dean of the University of Melbourne, who happens to be in London, and Australia is interesting, that they're doing a really good job in training their teachers. They're training more than they need, which is certainly not what we're doing here in the UK, where we have a shortage of teachers. They have a tradition in Australia of the various provinces and territories in Australia having very much their own jurisdiction on education, as you do in the US and as they do in Canada. But I think it was Julia Gillard's government, when she was Prime Minister, who decided that they were going to assert a bit more of a federal voice on education. And they have now developed teacher standards at a federal level. Including an MTeach standard, a mastery level. And they're now about to raise the bar again, Field, the Dean tells me. And the quality of what they're doing is really strong. And I'm interested in whether or not we can assert that sort of standard. And I'm not a big fan of reinventing the wheel. If someone's done it really well, maybe the Australian one could translate really well. And when I look at the British and the English medium international school world, the American schools as well as the British ones, they're expanding like crazy. It feels like in any emerging economy now, the definition of middle class is that you send your child to an English medium school, so they're taught the whole curriculum in English. And so those schools are desperate for English teachers, English language, teachers who are fluent in spoken English. And ideally they want trained in Australia, US and UK. That world has gone from 90,000 teachers 10 years ago to 350,000 now. Some are predicting that in 10 years there'll be 750,000 teachers in those schools. It would be helpful for them to have an international standard so that they can move around if they choose to, but also move back home, where people might need them to come back and teach. So yeah, I think there's a logic to what you're saying, Barbara, that you've got the Common Core across most of the states in the US. And from some of the conversations I have in the US, it feels like those that are not Common Core are now starting to find the difference from Common Core. So Common Core is still the starting point, and then what do they want to do differently? So there is a core there to teach to. So why not have some federal teaching standards? My guess is Arnie Duncan hasn't got time to do it under the current president. I don't know who the next president will be, or indeed who the next Arnie Duncan will be, but maybe that's something on there that we should get put on their agenda.
So Carol from Australia has raised her hand. Go ahead, Carol.
Thank you, Steve. Can you hear me all right?
Really well, Carol.
Excellent. Lovely to listen to your presentation today, Jim. I have been enthralled with it throughout, and I don't have a question for you. I actually wanted to comment on your mentioning of the Australian system, and thank you for that. I just wanted to mention that...
Was I accurate?
Yes, you were. There's more to it than that. Of course, we have a great standardized system for teachers of adult learners, and that was begun with the Australian Flexible Learning Framework about 10 years ago. And that actually had a huge impact on the standardizing of curriculum for certificate level right through to diploma for learners in all states of Australia, which really amalgamated everything and made it simple for both learners and teachers to move between the states to continue doing their thing.
Yep. That's really helpful. I'm speaking at the big EdTech conference in Brisbane at the end of May, and so I'm going to go and spend a week or two in Australia, so I can better understand exactly what's going on down there. But that's helpful to understand it with that detail and that context. But also to have it kind of confirmed that once you create that framework of standards, it does ease people as teachers being able to move around and make a richer range of choices to suit their lives.
So we probably have time for one more question. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat, or you can raise your virtual hand. Jim, I'll take this opportunity to ask another question. We're very comfortable with the idea that when we go into a city, there will be a variety of restaurants. So an Italian restaurant, a Thai restaurant, an Ethiopian restaurant. And so this idea of standardization feels like the McDonald's version of education. Why is it that we're so uncomfortable with variety and diversity in education?
Well, I guess, the US, Chile, Sweden, and England are the places that have done the most around choice and parental choice and starting to sort of embrace a diversity of different sorts of schools. And we have a real confusion of different sorts of school structures here in England. And we push choice quite hard. What's at the end of the road of choice is essentially marketization. And that's what you're talking about in terms of restaurants. Yeah. It's a market. And for that to work, you need surplus. So if there's only enough seats at tables in restaurants to accommodate all the people who want to eat that night in the town, then choice runs dry quite quickly, because if there's a great Italian and there's an average Mexican and a burger bar for everybody else, well, the Italian fills up, and then maybe the Mexican, I'm not a big fan of burgers, so I've left them at the bottom of the heap. And then everyone else gets what's left, where there's capacity, and then no one fills up. And to some extent, that's where we are with schools because they're publicly funded. We can't afford to build lots of schools and employ lots of teachers and not have them do much because they're not the first choice. The evidence from people like John Hattie, Professor down at Melbourne in Australia, says it doesn't make any difference. In fact, what Andrew Schleicher who's the head of education for the OECD would say is that there's some evidence that it just enhances the attainment gap between rich and poor, because the people who are better at exercising choice are those that are most educated and most advantaged. And that, to some extent, it therefore makes things worse. And so I would say we shouldn't think about creating lots of different sorts of schools in the same way we have lots of different sorts of restaurants. But we should be freeing up teachers from being straitjacketed too much by curriculum to allow them to have a diversity of different sorts of teaching and different sorts of content in teaching and very different experiences through schools, so that we get that range and that move away from a sort of blandness and a conformity and a uniformity, and just doing what the minister wants, but in school rather than between schools.
I think we've hit the perfect stopping point. It's almost 10 o'clock for you, Lord Jim. We've had a great conference. This has been a great closing keynote. I'm clapping for you by hovering over the smiley face and going down to the applause icon. It's sort of hidden. But in any way that you can, please feel free to express your appreciation to Jim Knight. That was delightful. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm just going to put in my Twitter hashtag in my Twitter handle for those that haven't seen it. So if you want to say anything to me on Twitter, then you can get hold of me there. But thank you very much.
Thanks to Lord Jim Knight. Thanks to Lucy Gray as a superb co-chair. Thanks to all of you for attending. We do have the after-conference celebration in a separate room right now. It's in the conference schedule. Come join us for a little bit of a celebration and appreciation, those of you who've presented or volunteered or just want to come in. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day or night, depending on where you are.
Thank you. See you.